Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. V'arivna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Torah b'fiנו b'piv beit Yisrael. ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאיהם בית ישראל. כולנו יודע שמעך ולומדי תורתך לשמה, ברוך אתה אדוני מלמד תורה לעמו ישראל.
Amen.
Amen.
אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר ברך בנו מכל עמים ונתן לנו תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Amen.
At which I needed to speak to Rabbi Cohen, because in the actual notes of the Gemara, on the Schottenstein, it's not clear at all. Rabbi Cohen actually had to go to the Tosfos and found a bit of the solution. I want to see if I can actually show you the sort of problem that was presented. And you can see it wasn't my issue. Now, one of the reasons I know, not your fault, that you guys never really did Chazorah is because more than one person thought it was my hang-up. I guarantee you at this time of the year, I'm not going to create problems where problems don't arise. I don't have the energy for it. I've got other issues to deal with. So I'm not going to hack an issue in the Gemara where I've got a hang-up and subject the rest of you to my mental illnesses. I do that to you anyway. Okay, so not going to be in this case. This was a case purely of the Gemara. And when more than one of you said, listen, let's just move on, unfortunately we couldn't, because this was a hang-up the Gemara had, and this is why the Gemara had a hang-up. So, Kevin, I can hear the drilling now.
Okay, let me put it on, yeah.
Sorry, did you go?
So the issue, if you can read from the screen, Marco, you want to give a stab at it?
No, just hang on. I'm just switching off my phone. Someone just phoned.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Hold on 1 second. Okay.
Sure.
One is liable for shame. Hold on, I lost it. One is liable for shame only if the damages are done in the damaged party's yard. But if the mouth of one's animal is deemed to be his own premises, even when the animal is in someone else's yard, then an animal's eating never legally occurs in the damaged party's yard. How then does the Torah impose a liability for shame? Is it not self-evident then that the mouth of a cow is treated as the damaged party's yard, and so there's no room for injury in this matter?
Okay, so inquiry in this matter. Okay, so what Rashi is saying here is as follows. He's saying the exact same question that I had. Listen, the classic case of shame is considered if you send forth your animal and it consumes and walks, if it consumes in the yard of another. Okay, that's a classic case of shame with that biblical verse, Exodus chapter 22, verse 4. Okay, so here what it's saying is, if you want to say the mouth of the animal, like Paris, Marco's dog is owned by Marco, and therefore the anatomy of the dog is owned by Marco. Anything in that dog's mouth belongs to Marco because he's the owner of the dog and his dog damaged. So therefore, it's in the premises of the damager. What it's saying here is exactly my question, is that this is in note 4 of the Schottenstein, and I'll tell you what daf it is. It's in the 23rd daf in B1. So what it's saying here is very clearly, the very premise is that you're liable for shame if it occurs in a damaged party's yard, right? So then if you want to say that Marco, as Paris's dog's owner, the dog's his property, and anything in the damager's yard, meaning in the dog's mouth, belongs to the damager, and therefore it's not in the damaged party's yard, how would you ever be culpable of shame? Because now we're saying that the food in the dog's mouth belongs to the damager, not the damaged party, even if it's in the damaged party's yard. So then, in what basis would you be ever liable for the shame, the tooth aspect? Does that make sense in terms of my question? Marco, what is your question?
So my question, isn't it a Kal Vachomer? I mean, if it's in the damaged party's yard and it's got the owner's, and it's deemed also to have, naturally the dog belongs to the owner, it's a double proof.
It's not. It's a contrary to each other. I'll prove it. So if I want to say that if your animal is, we'll get to I just want to state the problem before Rabbi Cohen states the solution. The problem is as follows, is in order for a person to be liable for Shane and Regal, you have to be in the damaged party's yard, which is why you're exempt in the public domain. Because the biblical verse in Exodus chapter 22, verse 4 says, and if he sends forth his animal in the field of another, which means it has to occur in the same field as the damaged party's yard. So if your cow comes into my yard and eats my cabbages, you're liable because your animal trespassed and then ate my stuff. Okay? So what we're saying is here is if we all of a sudden want to claim that the mouth of your animal is now technically your property, since you're the damager, and whatever's in your animal's mouth is founders keepers, because we're saying it's in the mazik's yard, the damager's yard, then in that particular case, we're saying it's a contradiction. Because where would you ever find a case where you're culpable for shame? Because if I'm catching your animal, your cow in my yard eating, and I say, Michael, you've trespassed in my premises, you're eating my cabbages, you need to pay. And you say, listen, that's my animal. I pay for the vet bills. I own the anatomy of the animal. And therefore, the mouth of that animal is my property. And whatever's in that mouth of the animal is mine. That's how you met.
Okay.
So in other words, that's what the Gemara is bringing forward in terms of this point.
Damon, can I just add something? Sorry.
Please.
So just a quick thing. Is it only what's actually in his mouth? What about what is consumed? So that's a separate thing. What is consumed is not in his mouth. That's already been consumed.
Yes, but I could say exactly the same argument, and I think it's a great question. The argument I can say, Gavin, is yes, that what is in the stomach of my animal is no different to what's in the mouth of the animal. It's my animal. It's now my animal's possession.
Okay. That's a good point.
Same. In fact, it's very difficult to find evidence because nobody on the big field knows what's gone missing exactly. You can only see evidence of it. But it's exactly the same point. So this is the fourth point of the Gemara on page 23b1. And because that was the point, my issue is when would you ever be culpable for shame payment? All of a sudden, Rav Murray comes up with the discussion and say, yes, you can. Because if you look at the Torahs of shame, you're talking about an animal rubbing its back against a wall or an animal soiling fruits. In that particular case, we're saying that it still does get physical gratification because the definition of shame was the category where an animal derived physical gratification from its act, whether it be eating or rubbing an itch or rolling around, etc. Physical gratification solved. Art, please, Buddy the cat. Seriously. And in that particular case, what we're saying here is so Rav Murray poses this question, and then the Gemara brings an issue stating that, listen, it has to fulfill the biblical commandment that says, and the tooth consumes until its end. This was in 3b, which means something has to be consumed totally in order for it to fulfill the biblical edict. So the problem is here is you're saying, well, how does it want to do it with a wall? And Rav Murray says, okay, in the old days they had wall murals, of pictures, etc. And what happens is if you plastered it, if you plastered the wall with a design, and then the animal rubbed itself and didn't damage the wall, but completely destroyed the artwork, the wall mural, it would fulfill the verse, and the tooth consumes until its end, because there's nothing left of the mural. So they're saying in that case, a Torah could fulfill that verse, and you wouldn't, if you want to say that the tooth is considered the damager's yard, In other words, you're not liable even in the premises of the damaged party. You've still got the tortoise of the wall and the soiling, or when an animal soils fruits by rubbing its back and the blueberry is pressed against the soil to where you can't recover and eat it correctly. So he's saying in that case, you fulfill the biblical edict and it consumes until its end. If that's how you would explain in the damager's yard, in the damaged party's yard, how you're liable. Even if the mouth of the animal is considered in the damager's yard, in the damaged party's yard, you're liable for the tordos of shame. And my issue was as follows. I had two issues. The first issue is, when would you ever then have a classical case of shame? Because again, the of is the tooth. So therefore, if the of is the most important, the category, and then you have the subcategory, the rubbing against the wall, or alternatively, the soiling of the fruits where the animal rubbed against the fruits, in that case, the tordos would hold, but not the of. So why would you name a category if the of would never apply and only the tordos would apply? And surely the of is the most important, because Rav Papa asked in the very question, do you pay for the same as the tordos as we do in the of? Which means eventually we came to the conclusion, yes. But it still means that the of would be considered the most important for such a question to come up. And it certainly is equally as important if you pay the same. That's for sure. And then the problem is the word shane, being the tooth of the whole category, means that if Marco's animal ate in my yard, and because it's in Marco's animal's mouth, it belongs to Marco, that whole biblical verse of shane, and it consumes in the field of another, when would you ever have that verse working? Because if an animal rubs its back, it's not consuming anything. It's damaging, but it's not consuming. Those were some of my issues. My issue further to which was, you can't have a case when you want to use the biblical verse and the tooth consumes until its end, and Rav Murray has to prove that until its end, meaning its complete destruction, which is why he brings the example of the wall and the mural that's rubbed off, even if the wall is still standing. It proves that you have to destroy something completely in order for it to fulfill the edict. So if, for example, it consumes, we learned this in 3b, food partially, and it's still going to grow back, you pay qualitatively for and quantity for what it's ate. We learned that in terms of, is it a high quality land, is it medium or low, and what portion do you eat, etc., etc. But the point is, the food that the animal did consume, even if it's not all of it, that part is irretrievable. So if there's still a crop to grow, then fine, you would pay the difference between the quality crop it consumed, because when a second crop grows, we learned it's never qualitatively the same, so you would pay the difference, but you still have paid for what the animal consumes. And when it uses the term, and the tooth consumes until its end, what does the tooth imply? Shame. So you can't use the second part of the verse, and it consumes until its end, to say with the wall, and it fulfills that biblical edict, but it doesn't with the part and the tooth consumes, because then why bring it up for shame in any event? So these were the problems that I had based on what was brought up. So Rabbi Cohen said that there is a Tosfos that brings special circumstances as to when this problem actually occurs. Okay, and it's in a specific Tosfos. Now, we seem to have lost three people. We've lost Gavin, who, thank God's just appeared. We lost Kevin, who I know he had a technician that was coming to work on his computer. And now I don't know where Arthur is. I don't know if Arthur's still recording. Arthur, are you there?
Recording.
Okay, well, I think he's getting rid of the cat. All right, so I'm going to play Rabbi Cohen's issue, and then you guys tell me what the story is. Just hang on. Okay. Tell me if you can hear from the speaker. I'm going to play it.
So I looked at your question. Maybe what will help to understand it is the Tosfos says that the essence of the question is not in the scenario where the animal goes and puts something in its mouth. He says the animal takes something from the victim's property. That's clear that they're going to be chayav. The question is what happens if it lands in the animal's mouth but the animal didn't take it. So for example, a goy put it in the animal's mouth, or a chereshoit of a cotton, a mental incompetent put it in the animal's mouth. There you don't have that the animal took it, and we want to know is what's it considered. Is there might be grounds to say that nevertheless it's still considered the courtyard of the victim, in which case the owner would be chayav, or maybe it's not, maybe it's the courtyard of the aggressor, of the mazik. And he says that's the question over here. He says that's the question over. That's the essential question of what the case is, what the definition of the mouth is. It's where the animal actively goes and takes it. There's no question about it. He says the question is where it's put in, and we want to make reference. He says we want to make reference to this sugya and learn from this sugya that we can answer it, that it must be like the courtyard of the nizak, that even though the animal was not active in getting it into its mouth, he would still be chayav. Again, so now that changes it a little bit, because you're right, there's no question on the obvious case if if the animal goes to bite it, because he explains, Tosfos says that the whole idea is exeris hakosov, the fact that one is exempt if it's in a different domain is exeris hakosov, is it's not a logical thing, it's a decree from the Torah, and therefore the question is on what are the parameters of that issue, that it's defined as somebody else's space. I hope that helps a bit. If you want further stuff, I suggest the dafyomi.co.il is a good resource. Another wonderful resource is shasilluminated.org. A great resource is all daf. All daf collects a whole number of different resources, and got fascinating stuff on that. And dafachaim.org. So particularly on the Shas Illuminated and the All Daf, you'll find a lot of other commentaries that go into, and shirim that go into it in much more detail. You'll find it fascinating. Okay, have a great day.
Okay, could you hear Rabbi Cohen's explanation?
Yeah, but yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to just mention, because Arthur very kindly sorted out that particular mazik. Thank you, mate. I appreciate it. And then Kevin had to sort something out. So Arthur.
No, it went off. It just went off. I missed
Okay.
I missed what the beginning of Rabbi Cohen said.
That's fine. So Arthur, I just want to let you know what Rabbi Cohen said. So what he basically said is that this is dealing with an exceptional case. He read a Tosfos that deals with a case where you have somebody that's mentally incompetent or a goy, because if a person that's mentally competent, he didn't say this, but this is obviously inferred. If somebody is mentally competent and they take something that doesn't belong to them and put it in the animal's mouth, a mentally competent person is then responsible for having the dais, the ability to see consequence, and having done it himself, okay? And therefore that person himself would be responsible. If it's a goy, they not know what the law is of the land, according to halacha, or somebody that's a minor or mentally incompetent or retarded or deaf, mute, etc., anybody that's considered in the category of not seeing consequence to action or not being aware of the law, not through ignorance, but it's not even their culture, would not be held liable necessarily. And then we're asking that since the food wound up in the animal's mouth, is it now considered a case of that it's now the damage is animal and therefore you're not obligated because it's it belongs to the damager, or is it considered in the damaged party's yard because the produce still comes from the damaged party? Which almost reiterates the previous discussion, is where's food taken from? In other words, do you make somebody accountable, an animal, where the food was taken from or where the animal consumes the food. So according to Tosfos, this is the same Tosfot, not the same thing, but Tosfot obviously is aligned in his thought process throughout, is that it's not where an animal takes the food from, it's where it consumes the food. Okay, whereas Rashi is of a different opinion. Rashi sees it literally that where the animal consumes the food from, the source of the food, like the asparagus, it's not asparagus. I know, I thought so at first when I read the Hebrew. It's this long stalk that when it's eating, it draws it from that original point. It's almost like you can think of hay growing or long grains, etc., that it could be in the private domain and the animal in the public domain is drawing it out, at which case is responsible according to Rashi because the animal is taking it from the private domain to the public. Whereas Tosfot will say, well, where's the animal eating it? It's eating it in the public domain, therefore you're not liable. So Rashi and Tosfot have got two different opinions on this matter. So that's something to bear in mind. But if you look at the Schottenstein, and I know you guys have got a lot of pressure at this time of year, you will see this wasn't my hang-up. This was a hang-up of the Gemara, and the fact that at no point did the Schottenstein seem to illuminate the clarity in this. Why? Because it brings up this whole point in point number 4, where I shared my screen with you to show that, well, when would a case of a damager ever being responsible in the damaged party's yard if the mouth of the animal is considered the damager's property? The very fact that there was such a question means that Schottenstein never brought it up. Does that make sense? So that wasn't my issue. So at least Rabbi Cohen, thank God, is good at Aramaic and can find other Tosfots and resources, because we were feeling a little bit of frustration. But I know you guys thought it was my hang-up. It wasn't. All right, so let's read the Gemara straight from start to finish and see if we can have a little bit of clarity. We've got 10 minutes, and then we'll go through it now. Okay, give me a second. All right. So the conclude on the basis of this Mishnah that the mouth of the cow who is in the damaged party's yard is considered as the damaged party's yard. Well, if it is treated as the damager's yard, then why does the Mishnah rule that the master pays for the biscuit that his dog has eaten? Let the master say to the owner of the biscuit, what is your bread doing in the mouth of my dog? So what's that saying? It's a rhetorical way of saying that the biscuit has been eaten on the damager's premises, a case in which the dog's master is not liable to pay. So what it's saying is basically, how can you treat, if you've got to treat, it's initially proposing that you've got to treat where if the animal ate the biscuit on the biscuit owner's yard and you're having to pay, you've got to treat the mouth of the dog as the damaged party's yard. Otherwise, you wouldn't be liable to pay. Because if you viewed it as the damager's premises, meaning the Michael owns his dog, and what's in the mouth of his dog belongs to Michael because Michael pays the vet bills, then that would be the damager's yard, at which case Michael could say, well, what is your food doing in my premises? What is it doing in my dog's mouth? So it's posing, that's the inquiry it's proposing. So it says, for the inquired, is the mouth of a cow who's in the damaged party's yard treated as the damaged party's yard or as the damager's yard? So the Gemara asks that there is apparently no basis for inquiry in the matter, because it's saying initially, like I did, is that if you say it's treated as the damager's yard, then how do you ever find a case where the merciful one in his Torah obligates a person for damages done through shame of his animal? So what it's saying is exactly what I was saying, is that if it's considered that if you're in the damager's yard, that the minute the animal has it in the mouth, it's considered the premises of the damager. When would you ever find a classical case for shame? You wouldn't. So,
Yeah, Damon,
so
this
what,
is yeah.
yeah.
This
So
is again.
what,
Sorry, this is again,
yeah.
and I'm obviously not insightful enough to appreciate this, but this is when I find it irritating. You know,
I hear.
a dog goes into someone's yard and takes something or eats something. Obviously, you know, it's someone else's property. It's consumed, and the damager is liable, okay, to the damaged party. Why would we ever start talking about this other kind of stuff? Right
Exactly.
now,
Exactly.
why? And then we come back to like sanity, and we say, well, how can it be that the truth is? I mean, what for?
I agree with you, Marco, 100%. And this was my irritation when I spoke to all of you guys the other day, and you
It's
were
like
arguing with me. I said,
intellectual.
what would you ever think that if you came into my premises and damaged, that you claim that I could claim that if I cup something and put it in my bag and say, well, it's my bag, now I own it. It's the same sort of illogical premise. Is
Exactly.
what would ever make you go down that rabbit hole and have that line of questioning when it doesn't fit any sort of logic of culpability whatsoever. And that
Yeah.
was my frustration and irritation completely. Let me just read on a little bit. I'll share it. Let me just read
It's
on
like
so
someone
that we can just
what are
have
just
it.
trying to be clever about everything. I mean, what do
But
I
I
don't
don't
get
know.
it.
All I know is that our obligation as Jews is to learn every day and just kind of suck it up and just roll with the punches for now. Unless you had a Rabbi Cohen who has this sort of Aramaic on tap. Maybe you're learning with the wrong guy, because if he has all this
No,
Aramaic, even he had to research this. Even he had to.
Listen, I don't think it's a bad example. I think it's a good example, but it's not well explained. That should be an example where it's properly explained. That's the example.
Correct. So
Damon?
what Mark was saying, I'll come to you right now, Kev. What Mark was saying, Kev, is that what's frustrating of the Gemara is it often turns around and withholds information. You go through this whole discussion and adds information, and it does feel frustrating. In other words, reveal the information to start with.
No,
Okay,
correct. I'm agreeing with that.
Kev, what are you going to
The
ask?
the whole thing is food for thought.
Food for thought.
rubbish.
Right, guys, I just want to cover a little bit of ground. Just give me 1 sec. Now that we've
Okay.
said the issue, we've got 9 minutes left. Let's just try and see if we can get through this part and go to more pleasant place. All right. So, the Gemara asked that there's apparently no basis for inquiry in this matter, exactly the same as I'm saying, Mark was saying, and the rest of you are saying. But if you say it's treated as damages yard, then how do you ever find a case where the merciful one in his Torah obligates a person for damage done through the shame of his animal? So the Gemara answers, Rav Mari, the son of Rav Kahana, said, the Torah obligates one to pay for shame in a case where the animal rubbed herself against a wall for her own gratification, thereby damaging the wall. Or she soiled fruits by rolling herself on top of them for her own gratification. So Rav Mari is saying now is, listen, the two tordos of shame still apply. So it still has application. Okay? And then the Gemara challenges this explanation on the following. It says, Mazutra objected to it. It said, but I need a case in which fulfills the condition as the tooth destroys unto its completion. And this is lacking in Rav Murray's case, because this again was a biblical requirement, and the tooth consumes until its completion. So what happens here is Rav Murray says, according to Ravina, this is what's answered by Ravina that defends Rav Murray. He said, Rav Murray meant that the animal rubbing against its wall is a case where it rubs out images that are on the wall. It doesn't mean that the wall necessarily has to fall down to destruction. The murals get rubbed off. And Rav Ashi says in defense of Rav Murray, what Rav Murray meant by animals soiling fruits is by rolling on them. It's a case where it presses the fruits into the mud so that they're irretrievable for consumption. Okay. Now, what I've got a problem with here, just very, very clearly, is if you mention and the tooth consumes until its destruction, they seem to leave out the word and the tooth. The tooth implies eating. All of a sudden, it's focusing on the word until its destruction. And it's mentioning a case of a tall door where even if the wall doesn't fall down, the mural, the image can no longer be seen and it's now destroyed. And it will fulfill that verse. Or a case of fruits like mulberries were rubbed in the ground when an animal was rubbing its back on the fruits, and now you can't sell it and make jam because it tastes very muddy. So I hear that. But what about the word "and the tooth consumes"? Nobody's focusing on the word tooth, and the word tooth clearly means eat. So what this is seeming to do is giving an answer, but it's not addressing how the Av can disappear and the Tordos are holding. The Tordos of rubbing against the wall and soiling fruits. It's just saying now, and in fact, as we just reiterated, Rav Papa says, is the Tordos, Kevin, is the Tordos as liable for financial full payment as the Av? The very fact that you say, is it as much payment, means that the Av is even more important. Because it's the category upon which the subcategories are based. Okay? So it doesn't seem to address this issue. So it brings Gemara in Sanhedrin 67b. Okay? Sorry, 76b. So I just want to go into that Sanhedrin thing quickly. We've got 5 minutes left. So it says the Gemara seeks to resolve this inquiry on Sanhedrin 76b. Come learn and prove from the following Mishnah. If one incited a dog or against a person, or incited a snake against him, he is not liable. So the Gemara explains, well, who is not liable to pay for the damages to the injured victim? The Mishnah apparently means that the inciter is not liable, which implies, but the dog's master is liable to pay for the damage. Because if it was to say that they are not liable, both the inciter and the dog's animal, Rashbad actually brings a case of saying that it would have mentioned the word they, meaning they are not liable, not just what do you call it? Not just the dog owner is liable, but the inciter himself is liable. So the very fact that it didn't mention the plural means someone is liable. And if the Gemara ends up turning around and saying that the inciter is not liable, who does it leave for liability? The animal's owner. Hi, Steve. Nice to see you. I can't catch you up now because we're in the middle of something.
Yeah.
Welcome
Okay, no
to
problem.
join.
It's some
Okay.
technical issues, you're saying.
Sure. So what we're saying here is if it didn't use the term they, and it says the inciter is not liable, the only body left for liability is the dog owner. That's what it's saying according to the Gemara, and that's explained by Rashbad. All right. So on that particular case, it says the Mishnah apparently means that the inciter is not liable, but the dog's master is liable for damage. So why is this whole Gemara brought up? It says accordingly, the Gemara develops its proof, but if you say that the animal's mouth is treated as the damages yard, then why is the dog's master liable? Let the owner of the dog say to the injured victim, what is your hand doing in my dog's mouth? So what it's saying is, the whole thing that it's proving that this is incorrect is it says that the dog's master, if it's liable for biting somebody, and then the dog's mouth belongs to the damager, it's saying it's the equivalent of somebody breaking in your premises, and if they're breaking into your property, they're not responsible. So this is actually proving that it's the damaged party's yard from the very fact that the owner of the animal is liable. Because if it's considered the damager's yard, he's not liable because it's like somebody jumped your fence and was bitten by your animal. The truth of it is, I agree with Marco, you don't need a brisa to tell you something that's obvious. But in any case, it's here to prove that the mouth of the animal is considered the damaged party's yard. Because if the mouth of the animal in Sanhedrin was considered the damager's yard, then the owner of the animal would not be liable. Do you understand this case that's being brought forward? Or not? Guys,
Yeah.
ask me a question.
No.
Okay, so Michael, this is what I'm saying. I'm happy you said no. Is it saying, listen, this proves beyond a doubt that your dog's mouth is considered the damaged party's yard? Because if we take a case in Sanhedrin, that the inciter took your dog and aggravated it and made it bite a third party. The very fact that you're liable as the animal's owner, that's a problem in and of itself. We're not going to deal with that today. But the very fact that you'd be liable as the animal owner is proving that it's not, the mouth of your dog is not your property, because if it was your property and somebody entered into your property, you're not liable for damaging them. Again, they broke into your house and they ended up getting damaged. It's like a chihuahua that comes on your property and gets eaten by a Doberman, and you want to claim for the chihuahua being eaten by the Doberman. The owner will say to you, but your chihuahua should never have been in my property. Just like the injured party, if it would say to Michael, but you need to pay me for the hand that your dog caused, the injury to my hand, Michael could say, but what is your hand doing in my dog's mouth? Meaning, it's not my problem, because it's as if it's in the yard of the damager. So if we take the inciter out of the argument, let's just keep it as a very clean argument. Say there's no third party. What we're saying here is as follows, is if the dog's owner is responsible, it means it's seen as the damager's yard, okay, damaged party's yard. Because if it's seen as the damager's yard, you're not liable for things coming to your property. That's all it's trying to say. In other words, the very fact that you're liable for your animal biting somebody is the fact that it's considered in this Gemara to be the damaged party's yard. Just like you're responsible if your animal consumes in the field of another. Because if the animal's mouth was considered your property, then anything in your property you covered for. That's all it's saying. I personally think this is a case of Keren. I don't know why they're mixing it up with Shane. For me. But to me, they're two separate issues. Anyway, guys,
I think they're just trying to show that the domain